Welcome. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And this is James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com, and we welcome you back to another episode of The New World Next Week, which, of course, you can find all the info, all the links, all the audio, all the video at newworldnextweek.com. James, every now and then we'll sort of do thematic episodes, and this week will be no exception to that. And we thought, let's do a food episode. You and I used to do weekly Food World Order episodes last year until schedules kind of got in the way. So this will maybe be a throwback to those Food World Order episodes. And actually, all of these articles are posted to my own foodworldorder.com, where we begin from Reuters as the United Nations offers a banquet of blemished food to highlight waste. The United Nations treated government ministers and officials to a meal of blemished African fruit and vegetables on Tuesday, that's yesterday, February 19th, to highlight how perfectly edible food is being rejected by European supermarkets. The 5-course meal for 500 delegates at a week-long United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, in the Kenyan capital included grilled sweet corn tamales, yellow lentil dal, and mango miso, a tropical version of the Italian dessert tiramisu. The food was all reject grade by the standards of European buyers who sometimes cancel orders after produce has been harvested. The rejected food often rots or is fed to livestock because farmers produce more than local markets can absorb. Quote, no economic, environmental, or ethical argument can be made to justify the extent of food waste and loss currently happening in the world, end quote, said Achim Steiner, head of UNEP, which hosted the dinner. With this dinner, we are demonstrating to retailers, consumers, and policymakers who can push for change that the astonishing amount of food we throw away is not just edible and nutritious, but also delicious. It gets into the fact that 1.7 metric tons, that would be 1.87 tons, of food was collected both for the meal and as a donation to local charities. Tristram Stewart, a British founder of the Feeding the 5,000 campaign group that worked with UNEP, said farmers singled out supermarkets in Europe as the worst of their buyers abroad. Fruits and veggies rejected for cosmetic reasons due to color or shape. Beans had to be the exact right length, and then the ends were trimmed and fed to livestock. We are demonstrating the colossal scale of gratuitous waste, even in countries like Kenya where there are millions of hungry people. The waste of perfectly edible, ugly vegetables is endemic in our food production systems. James, before I throw it back to you, I'll mention we'll include a flashback to May of 2010 on foodworldorder.com. California throws away enough food to fill 35 Staples Center stadiums per year. And this is, I think, the thing, James, that flies in the face of everything that says, oh, well, we need genetically modified food to feed the starving world because we just don't have enough food, right, James?
Right, exactly. And of course, genetically modified food will fix that by producing lower yields? No, of course not. And exactly right. I mean, I think it's quite self-evident that we as a society waste way too much anyways, but I don't think I want the UNEP shoving this down my throat. I have my own concerns about their ulterior motives in all of this. And isn't it kind of funny and ironic? Usually it's Europe dumping the toxic GMO crap onto Africa, but now it's Africa getting their garbage back into Europe. All thanks to the UNEP, which makes all of these transactions possible. I mean, I have my misgivings about what this is really about, but I mean, the fact that people waste way too much food is beyond question. And again, that's something that people at their individual tables should sort out for themselves. And hopefully this won't affect many people out in the audience, because no one's really out there buying their foods at supermarkets anymore, right? They're all growing their own and getting it at local farmers markets. Well, maybe not. So unfortunately, this does affect a lot of people, and people should be concerned about where their food is coming from and who's growing it and how much is being wasted, because again, that is the solution to a lot of the poverty we see right now, is not to be such a wasteful society.
There's an Al Jazeera news report that I include along with this post, and actually there's videos for all of this week's stories for you to go check out. James, it's interesting in the Al Jazeera report to see the UN folks going, oh, no, look at this bruised food. This is how the poor people do it. It's kind of funny, kind of fascinating and sad. The other note I'll throw in is the independent grocery store chain that I worked for here in Portland, Oregon for several years. We have, I think, one of the best, produce selections you'll find anywhere, and that's because it is finely tuned and a lot of stuff is culled. However, the difference of the stores that I worked for, they actually will allow and encourage, and there's a whole program set up to do it, to let employees take damaged, dated, bruised food home. As long as you write it off and it goes on a slip, you can actually take that out. That's vastly, vastly different from most other international, multinational chains like Trader Joe's, who put their food under lock and key in the dumpsters to ensure that no one can get to it at all. There's actually an interesting documentary, perhaps I'll throw in this link, called Dive, about dumpster diving. So, James, we mentioned our good friends at the genetically modified industrial corporations, and that would be Monsanto. And that takes us to our second story this week, where we take it from now the Los Angeles Times. As Supreme Court justices skeptical of farmer who planted patented Monsanto seeds. In a closely watched patent case, Supreme Court justices appeared ready to dash the hopes of an Indiana farmer who claimed the unfettered right to plant the next generation of Monsanto's genetically modified soybeans. The justices strongly suggested in oral arguments Tuesday, again, that's February 19th, that they would agree with Monsanto that its patent protection covers not just the first plantings, but also seeds that are generated later from any planting. Why in the world would any company invest millions of dollars in creating a new seed if a farmer could buy one and freely reproduce it? Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. asked. Meanwhile, Mark Walters, a lawyer representing the Indiana farmer Hugh Bowman, argued that a patent holder exhausts his right after selling the product. So it gets into, as the article goes on, what the different justices' takes are. So the interesting part, and this is what the article points out, the only mystery seemed to be why the justices voted to hear the farmer's claim in the first place. And James, as a last note before I throw it back to you, meanwhile, an Obama administration lawyer joined sides with Monsanto in urging the court to reject Bowman's claims. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, surprise, surprise indeed. Well, this is exactly what is at the heart of the nightmare of the intellectual property society that we're living in. And it's one thing to argue about books and CDs, etc. It's another thing to argue about patenting life and then saying you have ownership over every possible generation of life that comes from the life that you have created in your lab monstrosities. I mean, the first and foremost thing that people can do about this is to not buy the Monsanto GMO crap. And unfortunately, that's harder and harder to do as it's mixed into basically every modified and processed food product on the market, which is why we need things like the Non-GMO Project and people just buying locally and sourcing locally so they know what they're eating. And absolutely, people have to fight against this entire precedent of patenting life tooth and nail, because this is the most disgusting and most horrific part of this entire process, that they think that they can now own every generation of life that comes from one of their monstrosities. And that's exactly the plan, isn't it? To infect every farmer's field with this crap, and then to own basically the entire food production of the United States. And unfortunately, they're a significant part of the way there. And I'm not holding my breath for the courts to actually uphold serenity and anything approaching sanity in this case. So we'll continue to follow it. But I think people have to do everything that they possibly can to ensure that they're not eating this GMO crap and contributing to the entire paradigm by giving their money to Monsanto.
James, I'll just throw in quickly. The Supreme Court is expected to issue the formal ruling by late spring, and it is noted that a ruling in favor of Monsanto would be a relief for companies such as vaccine makers and software makers that rely on patents and copyrights to completely stranglehold any creativity whatsoever. That's my own interpretation of that article, because I would argue that those guys don't create anything. And our final story this week will kind of show that ultimately we, the people and the small people, we come up with the innovations. We come up with the inventions and the songs and the designs and the stories and all of those things that ultimately it seems as though the American dream is, gosh, I can't wait to sell out. I can't wait till some multinational corporation or some private equity firm wants to come and buy up my American dream. Gosh, I can't wait to sell out everything I ever claimed to work for. So here we'll see it, and again, not that I'm ascribing integrity to the H.J. Heinz Corporation in the first place, but FBI probes suspected insider trading in the H.J. Heinz buyout. And again, this is posted to my own foodworldorder.com, coming by way of the Bilderberger-controlled Washington Post. The FBI has launched a probe into suspected insider trading activity that took place one day before H.J. Heinz announced that it would be acquired for $28 billion by a private investment consortium. The FBI confirmed the criminal investigation on Tuesday, days after the Security and Exchange Commission froze a Swiss account that the agency said was used by certain unknown traders to make highly suspicious trades in advance of the Heinz deal. We are consulting with the SEC to determine if a crime was committed, says a spokesperson for the FBI in New York. In a complaint filed in a federal court in Manhattan, the SEC alleged that the traders used a Goldman Sachs customer account in Zurich to buy certain options for $90,000. Those options became worth $1.7 million after the Heinz acquisition was announced the very next day. Goldman Sachs, don't worry, they weren't accused of any wrongdoing, and a spokesman said the company is cooperating with investigations. So it's unclear how this all came to the SEC's attention in the first place. The interesting note is that this account never seemed to have anything to do with Heinz in the past, so that threw up huge red flags. The trades took place last Wednesday, that would be February 13th, the last trading day before Heinz revealed that it would be purchased by a consortium made up of 3G Capital and our good friends at Berkshire Hathaway. Of course, spokesman representing the two companies declined to comment on the investigations. There is a frozen account. It was frozen by last Friday. So Sanjay Wadhya, Senior Associate Director at the SEC's New York Regional Office, says the defendants, who are either foreign traders or traders trading through foreign accounts, now have to make an appearance in court to explain their trading if they want their assets unfrozen. James, and I'll just say this will be like waiting to see if the folks who did all the insider trading before 9/11 would show up to collect their winnings, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so a Goldman Sachs customer on the inside of a $23 billion Warren Buffett deal manages to parlay $90,000 into $1.7 million on a few strategic bets placed the day before the deal goes through. Ask me how surprised I am. Unfortunately, no. This is the only thing that's surprising about this is that the SEC found it and is investigating. And perhaps, actually, I was just reviewing Syriana on my podcast as part of my film literature in the New World Order series, and part of the movie there is about the firm that is hired, the law firm that's hired to investigate the big merger that takes place in the film. Basically, all they have to do is come up with a couple of bodies to throw at the Department of Justice to show that they did their due diligence in the case, and all the other fraud investigations will be dropped. Well, in this case, maybe we have a convenient scapegoat, and, we don't have to look into anything else that Warren Buffett is doing. Anyway, unfortunately, this is the way these types of billion-dollar deals often will work, and as I say, the only thing surprising is that someone got caught out in this one. But as I say, that might just be a sacrificial lamb, and welcome to business as usual on the stock market. So this is, unfortunately, how money is made in the casino economy, and people better get used to it, because that's all the economy there is left, pretty much, now that they've finished looting it out. And don't worry, they'll continue running up Apple stock and saying that this is the future of the world, but people who know better are not buying it and are investing in real hard assets and real estate and things that they can actually use in the event of a collapse. And that's the only way to actually ensure that you do have something of real value after the coming crash, not just pieces of paper.
You know, and even just what you said reminded me, that'd be a whole other episode worthy of discussion of, don't worry about your real from the earth apples, just worry about these fake technological apples, and your future will be all right. James, you mentioned Syriana. I have not listened to that episode yet. That's a Steven Soderbergh film, isn't it?
Stephen Gaghan, actually.
Gaghan. Oh, I was thinking it was Steven Soderbergh. Okay, so scratch my next remark then, James. However, as long as we are mentioning films briefly, I like to throw out a mention. Of course, my day job is the producer of a talk show called Ground Zero out of Portland, Oregon, where this week we are working on having some high-profile guests. And actually, Monday night, we had the one and only Bruce Campbell of the Evil Dead films. Last night, we got to talk to Michael Rooker, who is on The Walking Dead. And we're going to talk to a few different folks as this week goes on. There's a big comic book convention in Oregon this week, so we had some of the guests on. So if you're fanboy, nerd boy, sci-fi horror fan, of course, you'd want to check out interviews with Bruce Campbell and Michael Rooker.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for the stories, and looking forward again to next week.
As always, man. Thanks so much.